Hello friends, today I am talking about salient features of National Environmental Policy 2006. A diverse developing society such as ours provides numerous challenges in economic, social, political, cultural and environmental arenas. The present national policy for environmental management is contained in National Forest Policy of 1988, National Conservation Strategy and Policy Statement on Environment and Development of 1992, Policy Statement on Abatement of Pollution 92, National Agricultural Policy of 2000, National Population Policy of 2000, National Water Policy of 2002 and some other related policies. So sustainable development concerns in the sense of enactment of human well-being. So broadly conceived, they are a recurring theme in India's development philosophy. So first, the human beings should able to enjoy the decent quality of life. Second, the humanity should become capable of respecting the fitness of biosphere. The National Environmental Policy is a response to our national commitment to a clean environment mandated in Constitution in Articles 48A and 51AG, strengthened by judicial interpretation of Article 21. It is recognized that maintaining a healthy environment is not the state's responsibility alone, but also that of every citizen. A spirit of partnership should thus be realized throughout the spectrum of environmental management in the country. The National Environmental Policy is intended to guide on number of actions that are necessary nowadays for further development of New India. Regulatory reforms, programs and projects for environmental conservation and review and enactment of legislation by agencies of the state, central and local governments. The policy also seeks to stimulate the partnership of different stakeholders, so public agencies, local communities, academic and scientific institutions, the investment communities and international development partners. So it is necessary to harness their respective resources, knowledge and strength for overall environmental management of our country. There are a number of environmental challenges, and the key challenges, their causes and impacts, I am going to tell you now. Environmental degradation is a major causal factor in enhancing and perpetuating the poverty. So especially poor people suffer a lot when such degradation impacts on soil fertility, quality and quantity of environmental arenas like water, air, forests, wildlife and fisheries. The dependence of the rural population, in particular tribal communities, on the natural resources, especially on biodiversity, is very much evident. their life revolves around the forests. Women, they face greater adverse impacts of environmental degradation or natural resource degradation. So being directly responsible for collection as well as the in touch with them, but they are rarely involved in management of such resources. The loss of environmental resource base, it results in certain group of people to suffer a lot. The economy, is showing the strong growth. Economic growth in its turn bears a dichotomous two-way relationship to the environmental degradation. On one hand, the growth may result in excessive use of environmental resources and its degradation through the use of the resources, pollutants that are generated, and failure of institutions. On the other hand, economic growth allows improvement in environmental quality. So it makes available the necessary resources for investments in environmental management. It generates social pressure for improved environmental behavior, institutions' responsibility, and changes in policy, the necessary changes that are required in policy. So policy failure emerge with various things, and there is very much necessary that excessive natural resources are not used. Inappropriate policy can also lead to changes in community managed systems and cause adverse effects on the environmental things. The major challenges arises because of global issues that the whole world is facing, and climate change, ozone depletion, loss of biodiversity, loss of habitat are the major reasons. Now I will tell you about the objectives of national environmental policy. Conservation of critical environmental resources, intra-generational equity and livelihood security for the poor. Next objectives is intra-generational equity. So to ensure judicious use of environmental resources to meet the needs and aspirations of current and upcoming generations. Integration of environmental concerns in economic and social development. These three things are the pillars of sustainable development. Efficiency in environmental resource use. Now, about environmental governance. Enhancement of resources for environmental conservation. So these are the objectives of NEP 2006. Now I will tell you about the principles of national environmental policy. So human beings are at the center of sustainable concerns, sustainable development that the whole world is talking nowadays. Everyone has right to develop. Environmental protection is an integral part of development process, and the precautionary approach must be followed. Economic efficiency must be considered always. Polluter pays principle, cost minimization in developmental projects, and the protection of incomparable values that are of natural and man-made things. Legal liability, equity. The cardinal principle of equity or justice requires that human beings cannot be treated differentially based on just certain differences between them. So these were the principles of NEP. I'll talk about public trust doctrine. The state is not an absolute owner but trustee of all natural resources. We want decentralization. Decentralization involves transfer of power from central authority to state or other local authorities, and it is very necessary to empower the public authorities. Integration. Integration refers to inclusion, addition of environmental considerations in different sectors and policy making of these. Environmental standard settings. The principle of legal liability may be viewed as an important legal doctrine of the polluter pays approach, itself deriving from the principle of economic efficiency. So whoever pollutes has to pay. Environmental standards must reflect the economic and social development situation in which they apply. Now, important thing is the preventive action. It is preferable to prevent environmental damage from occurring in the first instance. So it is very necessary and it can be done. It is in our hand. Environmental offsettings. There is general obligation to protect threatened or endangered species and other natural systems that are of special importance to all. We are all interlinked. Now I'll tell you some strategies and actions as part of this policy. Regulatory reforms. The present legislative framework is broadly contained in umbrella of a number of acts. Indirectly, directly, these are there: Environmental Protection Act of 1986, Water Prevention and Control of Pollution Act 1974, Water Cess Act of 1977, Air Prevention and Control of Pollution Act 1981, the law in respect of management of forests and biodiversity is contained in Indian Forest Act of 1927, Forest Conservation Act of 1980, Wildlife Protection Act of 1972, and Biological Diversity or Biodiversity Act of 2002. Now I will tell you about the specific actions that would be taken as mentioned in this policy. Specific actions. Institutionalize a holistic and integrated approach for the management of environment and natural resources. Identify emerging areas. Remove out the unnecessary laws and provisions mentioned in it. Emerging areas for new legislation. Review the body of existing legislation. It is necessary. Ensure accountability of the concerned levels of governments, whether it is in center, state, or at local level, for legislative changes in defined time frame. about substantial reforms carry out. That is also part of this policy. Environment and forest clearances. Environmental Impact Assessment (EIA) will continue to be the principal methodology for appraising and reviewing the developmental projects. So further, in order to make clearance process more effective, so certain actions will be taken, and these are like again encourage the regulatory authorities to ensure that environmental concerns are identified and addressed at the planning stage of developmental projects. Specifically assess the potential for chemical accidents that may occur, prediction of them. Give due consideration to the quality and productivity of the lands. Encourage clustering of industries. Restrict the diversion of dense natural forest areas. We can't do it. No need of it. Formulate and periodically update the codes of good practices. These are maybe related with the water quality standards, emission standards, and other codes. About coastal areas, so they wish to revise the coastal regulation zone notifications. Integrated coastal zone management plans should be reviewed at predetermined intervals, so to take account of geomorphology, economic activities, urban areas, settlements, and overall the conditions of these areas. Again, to decentralize the extent possible clearance of specific projects to the state level environmental authorities. As part of living modified organisms, so strategy is that the LMOs may pose significant threats to ecological resources, to us, and also to other organisms. So review the regulatory processes for living modified organisms, and all relevant scientific knowledge is taken into account for that. Ecological health and economic concerns are adequately addressed. So periodically review the national biosafety guidelines, again to ensure the conservation of biodiversity and human health when dealing with living modified organisms in transboundary movement. Now, as part of environmentally sensitive zones, strategies are to identify and give legal status to environmentally sensitive zones of our country, and as it is very necessary for their conservation. These are incomparable values. Formulate area development plans for certain zones by using scientific knowledge with adequate participation of local communities. Create local institutions with adequate participation for overall management of environment. Next, as part of monitoring of compliance, so take measures including development initiatives to enable Panchayat Raj institutions and urban local bodies to undertake monitoring and legal compliance with the proper plans related with environment management. So develop feasible models of public-private partnerships. So for the purpose of financial, technical and management of the resources. So involvement of private sector is very much, and they can play an important role for expansion of infrastructure, management infrastructure. So use of economic principles in environmental decision making will also be carried out to reverse the tendency to treat these resources as free goods. So we have to change, we have to go away, we have to divert our thoughts and go ahead with more responsible manner. So develop and promote the use of standard environmental accounting, auditing, ideal practices. Encourage financial institutions to undertake standard methodologies for appraisal of certain practices and projects. Facilitate integration of environmental values, as part of cost benefit analysis. Implement action plan to the use of economic instruments for environmental regulation. For example, without compliance, without conservation, funds cannot be released. Consider creation of National Environment Restoration Fund. So this is also part of this policy. Now about enhancing and conserving environmental resources. Land degradation. So I'll talk about few points here. The degradation of land through soil erosion, salinity, waterlogging, pollution and reduction in organic matter is happening throughout our country, our society. So encourage adaptation of science-based as well as mix of traditional sustainable land use practices. It is necessary. Promote reclamation of degraded and wastelands, forest lands. Prepare and implement thematic action plans for watershed management of the areas. Promote sustainable alternatives for shifting cultivation practices. Nowadays these have reduced, but still somewhere these are going on. Encourage agroforestry, organic farming, environmentally sustainable cropping practices and adopt the best efficient irrigation practices. Now about desert ecosystems, what will be the actions? Arid and semi-arid regions of India, they have spread more than 10 states of our country. So because of different geographical conditions, moisture conservation and proper management of water with scientific knowledge and traditional infrastructure will be carried out. Enhancing and expanding green cover based on local species, it is the need. Reviewing the agronomic practices in different areas, especially which are suffering, and promote agricultural practices in such desert ecosystems, arid and semi-arid areas. About forests and wildlife. Give legal recognition to the traditional entitlements of forest dependent communities, formulate appropriate methodology for restoring environmental sections, formulate and implement code of best management practices. So promote plantation of only such species that are local and that are very much necessary for conservation. Expand the network of protected areas in our country. Revise the norms, criteria and needs of data for placing particular species in different schedules, okay, as which is there, which are there in the Wildlife Protection Act of 1972. Formulate and implement programs for conservation. In addition, paralleling the multi-stakeholder partnerships for afforestation and related management activities. Joint forest management is best example of it. Promote site-specific eco-development programs and review and make more strict the provisions of relevant legislation. Now, next part is what about biodiversity and traditional knowledge and natural heritage, how they are linked and what we wish to do as part of this policy. Strengthen the protection of areas of high endemism having a different unique genetic diversity. Pay attention towards the potential impacts of developmental projects and biodiversity. Enhance ex situ conservation of genetic resources with help of the gene banks in different areas of our country. Again, in addition, there is need to formulate the appropriate systems for informed consents, fair and equitable benefit sharing in respect of biological materials and traditional knowledge. It is also part of Biological Diversity Act of 2002. Now about freshwater resources. Evaluate the impacts of climate change on glaciers and river flows. Promote integrated approaches for management of river basins by the concerned river authorities. So it will be carried out. In addition, consider and mitigate the impacts on river and estuarine flora and fauna. Integrate conservation and wise use of wetlands, much necessary. Ramsar Convention is there as part of conservation of wetlands. Incorporate special components in afforestation programs and to check the impacts on groundwater tables and the pricing of diesels like this. In addition, promote efficient water use techniques, sprinkle or drip irrigation, we all know about it. Mandate water harvesting and artificial recharge in all types of construction ways in urban areas also. Prepare and implement comprehensive strategy to regulate the groundwater use. Support research and development in effective techniques to manage the rural drinking water projects. Improve productivity per unit of water consumed, especially in industries. Decide the suitable sites for dumping of toxic waste and proper treatment of them. to check the excessive use of fertilizers and pesticides along with insecticides, and to identify the non-point source of pollution. Set up legally enforceable regulatory mechanism. Already it is there, but specially to for identified valuable wetlands as part of water. Formulate conservation and standard strategies for wetlands and involve local people and other stakeholders. Formulate and implement ecotourism strategies for identified wetlands. India is signatory to Ramsar Convention, and consider the impacts on wetlands that occur because of developmental activities. Now, as part of mountain ecosystems, we wish to adopt appropriate land use planning and watershed management practices, and this is necessary for sustainable mountain development. Adopt best practices and norms for infrastructure development in mountains. Encourage cultivation of traditional and native varieties of crops and horticulture in mountain areas. Promote sustainable tourism as part of best practices followed in some other societies, and take the measures to regulate the tourist inflows. We don't want the damage because of increased tourism activities. Then about coastal areas, we wish to mainstream the sustainable management of mangroves and disseminate, use the available technologies for regeneration of coral reefs. Again, we have to consider the sea level rise and vulnerability of coastal areas because of climate change and global events that occur every year. So, proper planning will be carried out for that purpose in order to face less damage. Adopt comprehensive approach for integrated coastal management. In addition, we wish to develop strategy to strengthen the regulation to address impacts, especially of shipbreaking activities, their impact on human health and coastal and marine resources. Pollution abatement. So various types of pollution are there. As part of air pollution, we wish to take an integrated approach for energy conservation through the adoption of renewable energy technologies. We wish to accelerate India's policy on environment. The programs that disseminate the improved fuel wood stoves and solar cookers. We wish to strengthen the monitoring and enforcement of the emission standards. So they must be in control, in standard limit. Prepare and implement action plans for major and expanding cities. Formulate national strategy for urban transport and promote reclamation of wastelands by energy plantation. So this is all necessary to prevent air pollution or to reduce air pollution in our society. So as part of water pollution, our action plan is, as part of this policy, to develop and implement the public-private partnerships, the models in order to treat effluents and sewage that are generated on larger quantities in different cities and larger heavily populated areas. Prepare action plans for major cities to address air pollution. Take measures to prevent pollution of water bodies and to enhance the capacities for spatial planning with help of state and local governments. In addition, research and development low-cost technologies to treat polluted water are very necessary, and that will be carried out. Again, to take account of the groundwater pollution, diesel which is subsidized provided to the people, and especially the pollution that occurs because of pesticides. As part of soil pollution, we wish to develop and implement standard methods of again public and private partnerships. So in order to have secure landfills, incineration of the wastes, and appropriate technologies to treat the toxic and hazardous wastes that are generated in different states of our country. So survey and national inventory of the toxic and hazardous wastes will be carried out, and even there is need. So this policy says that online monitoring system for the hazardous wastes will be developed. As part of it, strengthen the legal arrangements to address the troubleshooting emergencies that arise because of transportation, handling, and at the time of disposal of hazardous wastes. So particularly chemical accidents that can occur or may occur. So strengthen the capacities of local bodies for segregation, recycling, and reuse of the municipal solid wastes. So give again legal recognition and strengthen the informal sector, which plays an important role in waste collection, management, and even treatment. Promote organic farming of traditional crop varieties. Promote biodegradable and recyclable materials. On the other hand, to avoid soil pollution, it is necessary to manage the e-wastes as part of hazardous waste because they are more dangerous to the ecosystems. Next point is to action plans to reduce noise pollution. Policy says that appropriate distinctions between different environments and ambient noise standards will be developed. Noise standards in context of occupational exposure will be developed. Nowadays already they are. Formulate noise emission norms, and again in addition include ambient noise among the environmental quality parameters. So this is very important, especially in urban areas. So encourage dialogue between state, central and local authorities, other religious community representatives to adopt the enforceable durations, timings and use of loudspeaker or fireworks or other ways that generate noise. As part of conservation of man-made heritage, we wish to set the environmental standards, especially for air quality, and to identify its potential impact on designated heritage sites. So in particular, attention will be given to monitor and enhance the environmental standards. impacts on designated heritage sites must be considered at the stage of developing the terms of references for environmental impact assessment of project, TOR it is called. Now, as part of to face climate change, to mitigate climate change, our actions as mentioned in this policy are: adhere to the principle of common but differentiated responsibilities, especially to mitigate the greenhouse gas emissions. Equal per capita entitlements of global environmental resources to all countries. We support this way. Identify the vulnerable areas of our country because of climate change and identify the impacts on water resources, forests, coastal areas, agriculture and health of organisms. Assess the need for adaptation of future climate change, how to adapt, how to mitigate, these things will be carried out. Encourage the industry participation in development of clean development mechanism as part of Kyoto Protocol. Participate in voluntary partnership with other countries, collaborations to address the challenges of sustainable development and climate change. So especially in line with the guidelines, provisions that are given by United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change. Now, as part of environmental standards, management systems, certification and indicators, there are some action plans. As part of environmental standards, set up a permanent machinery comprising of experts in different areas, disciplines of environmental areas. So especially for emission standards and ambient standards. Strengthen the testing, monitoring infrastructure of ambient monitoring quality and include or involve the local communities and public-private partnerships. Step by step, progressively ensure the real-time, on-time availability of the monitoring data that is done in few major cities of our country nowadays. As part of environmental management systems, eco-labeling and certification, this policy asked to encourage the industry associations to adopt ISO 14000 environment management system, encourage adaptation of EMS through preference of ISO certified goods and services, formulate good practices, guidelines for eco-labels, promote good practices as part to conservation of natural resources and reduce adverse environmental impacts. Again, in addition, as part of clean technologies and innovation, this policy asks us to encourage capacity building in financial sector for clean technology switch over of the project proposals, very necessary. Set up mechanism to network technology research institutions in our country, public-private cooperation and adaptation, information and evaluation of clean technologies. So there is more focus on clean technology. create database of technologies and promote the dissemination of new technologies that are developed in our country as well as out of country. Promote adaptation of clean technologies in industrial sectors. Okay, now as part of environmental awareness, education and information, this policy says that we will develop and operate online real-time publicly accessible environmental information system of the key environmental resources and parameters, so including ambient air quality and the major point sources, water bodies, in order to collect this data in convenient format and to take proper decisions in future. Mainstream the scientifically valid environmental contents in curricula, education, primary, secondary and tertiary levels as well as professional levels of education. Then prepare and implement strategy for enhancing environmental awareness among general public and also special groups. So partnerships and stakeholder involvement. So as part of public community partnerships, so we want public-private partnerships, public community private partnerships, public voluntary organization partnerships, public private voluntary organization partnership. So various ways of partnerships, collaborations will be carried out. This policy suggests us. It is also very important that the principles of good governance should be implemented in order to have transparency, accountability and cost effectiveness and to increase efficiency of the institutions. Youth, they are very much vibrant sections of the society, of our country's population, and their energy will be used in conservation of environment. So as part of capacity building, review the present institutional capacities at central and state levels for enforcement of environmental laws and regulations. Incorporate all environmental programs in capacity development. Ensure continuous upgradation of knowledge and skills of the scientific and technical personnel which are involved in environmental management, so in public institutes, central and state agencies. So we wish to create dedicated personnel to manage our environment. As part of research and development, periodically identify the priority areas for research. Newer things, the issues that we are facing must be solved. Establish research programs in important areas, priority areas, and we expect the outputs in such areas. Encourage research as even other than government agencies and provide funds to them, provide institutional support to those who wish to carry out research. As part of international cooperation, we wish to avail the use of multilateral and bilateral cooperation through agreements for capacity building and environmental management. So we are committed at international level to do good things, standard practices, to implement standard practices in our country. Participate in mechanisms and arrangement of the multilateral agreements to enhance the flows of resources for sustainable development. Again, we wish to provide assistance to other developing countries, in particular scientific and technological capacity buildings for environmental management. Now I'm moving towards the last feature of this policy is that review of it. So undertake consultations after every 3 years. So from the group of diverse stakeholders, researchers, experts and other community-based organizations, industry associations, other voluntary organizations, to review and to update the national environmental policy. So it's over. Thank you for being here. Bye bye.